1979. Maceo Mazyck twisted left and right but the straitjacket wouldn't budge. It was wrapped so tight his arms were numb. His camouflage jungle hat and bent aviator glasses sat askew on his head. He wore them to hide his imperfections, to disguise him in the pigmented world where he was an outcast, a pink man in a black and white universe. He feared light and hated the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. Maceo was an albino Negro, a genetic misfit, born under the scorching South Carolina sun, a misprint, and a long line of discontent. While he had no personal memory of slavery, Jim Crow laws, lynching, or the Klan, his grandfather Zeke did. The old man stoked those fears like hot coals in a campfire. On sweltering summer nights, he told stories of human cruelty in great detail as his grandsons huddled on the front porch. 90-year-old Ezekiel Manigo Mazyck, hunched and crippled from age and agony, spoke of slavery in whispers, the way his grandfather had done, as if saying the word out loud might bring it thundering back on horsemen, riding out of the shadows, throwing torches and swinging rope. Some children memorized nursery rhymes. Maceo and his playmates remembered tales of torture. An uncle hanged for staring at a white woman, a cousin beaten bloody for no good reason, a brutal rape and murder of an aunt Maceo never met. Hardly a day of Maceo's life passed without remembering his grandfather spitting in the dirt after nodding and shuffling in deference to white men passing by. An excellent spitter, the old man could summon up a wad of mucus from the back of his throat, swirl it around in his mouth, and heave it like an oyster, minus its shell. That's a fury picture, isn't it? He could spray spittle between the gap in his front teeth, too. If he didn't like people, he'd spritz them in the face, and his lips never moved, fast, like a king snake. Maceo loved his grandpa Zeke, a blue-black field hand with shiny skin the color of a grapple. Maceo longed to be like the old man, dark and defiant, mostly dark. Old Zeke tried to make his grandson feel comfortable in his own skin, but Maceo's mottled pinkish hue and nappy blonde hair marked him as a mongrel and the run of the litter, smaller than his older twin brothers who teased him without mercy. They laughed and said their daddy didn't get a good toehold when he was making Maceo. Maceo didn't know what that meant exactly. He didn't know much. He didn't know much at all. Most days he just hid out on the boat, out of the scorching sun. He begged God for black skin, although he didn't know all that went along with that peculiar condition. The messages were mixed. One minute his grandfather stepped aside for white men. The next he swore under his breath he'd slit the cracker's throat and set them on fire. His grandfather hated white people and relished telling stories about them on the porch at night. One story stood out. The one about Zeke's baby sister, who had been raped and killed. The old man wept when he spoke of Santee, 5 years younger and the smartest of them all. He'd lower his head, put a finger to his lips, look around and whisper, "Now I'm going to tell y'all about what happened to Sister Santee. I know because I was there. They made me watch." The boys squirmed when they heard that. They didn't know exactly what rape was, just that it was bad, probably worse than death. But they cheered at the end when Zeke tracked down the killers and strangled them with his bare hands. Cut them up too. At least that's what he said. Maceo knew the story by heart. 20 years later, he broiled in outrage just thinking about what they did to Sister Santee. Then he drank. Anger and alcohol were an especially dangerous combination. The first drink led him down dark paths to slave ships and rice fields, cemeteries in the woods. The second took him deeper into despair, to a place where he hung by his wrists from chains and bled and twisted and turned in a futile attempt to save Santee as she scratched and screamed and begged for her life. Maceo's spiral into darkness often landed him in a chair under the glare of flickering light inside a dingy room on Bull Street, where he was covered in his own crap, his veins bulging like bee stings. Everybody in South Carolina knew Bull Street, a 100-year-old asylum for the insane. But only South Carolinians like Maceo knew what went on inside that place. At 5 foot 3 inches and 200 pounds, Maceo was the smallest of the Mazyck brothers. The other two were identical twins, perfect specimens. Maceo was flawed, a byproduct, short, stocky, the color of a suckling pig. Sometimes when brooding, he'd blame his father for his condition. Micah Mazyck was put out of his misery when Maceo was 3. He broke down like a mule in a cotton field, went berserk, swung his hoe wildly, and a white man on a horse shot him dead. Maceo was shelling green beans with his mother in the shade of the back stoop of their cabin when he heard the shot. It came from far away, sharp at first, then soft like an echo rolling through the woods, down the creek and into the yard. His mother jumped up, spilling beans everywhere, and turned toward the noise as she swept up Maceo into her arms, her hands trembling. That night, his father's body was dumped in the dirt beside the lane in front of the cabin. There was a hole between his eyes, which were still open. Maceo watched from the window as his grandfather shuffled up to the corpse, spit in the dirt twice, and hobbled off into the darkness. 20 years later, Maceo sat in the holding tank on Bull Street, twisting and turning, rattling his leg irons, squinting against the fluorescent flame. 200 years of hatred could not be restrained. So...